was also asked to introduce President Dr. Tom Ries, President of Concordia, and thank you again for what you're doing. Really appreciate it. Please welcome President Ries.
Thank you, Hector, and it's my privilege just to welcome you to Concordia. So I'll say bienvenidos and welcome, and that pretty much gets to the end of my Spanish, although I love the Spanish language and have made many efforts to study over the years, but it gets so complicated when you think it's going to be easy, so I'm going to keep working on it. We are very proud to be a part of this community now for our 121st academic year, and we are welcoming the largest single group of students to Concordia. Once again, we've had 4 years of straight enrollment growth and are very excited about it. One of the hallmarks of our university is our multicultural diversity, where 35 to 40% of our students in any given year are students of color. We have many ethnic backgrounds represented on campus, and we have this coming year 17 countries that will be represented in our student body of just over 4,000 students. So it's a great place to be. It's a great honor to be doing higher education in this community. But we will readily admit that we have lower numbers in the Latino and Latina populations than we wish we had. And so we're making a concerted effort to do a better job of that, and have added our first ever Hispanic admissions counselor. And I don't know that he's here to do, there he is, right there. Like, stand up. There he is. And this is our guy, and we're so excited to have him on our staff to lead that effort. Thank you for our help in working with the populations that really deserve to have a better exposure to what is possible when it comes to going to college. The other thing, of course, that I'll say before I sit down is that we just a few years ago, and many of you may realize this, made national headlines by reducing our tuition by $10,000, getting us much more transparent and making it much more possible for students of all economic backgrounds to consider a private higher education experience. And this is one of the reasons our enrollment continues to explode. So really great to have you here, and I know this is going to be a wonderful day as we hear Bruce's report and have some nice dialogue. So I'll bring Bruce up here and just say, my friend Bruce Corrie, but one of the leading experts in Minnesota on immigrant capital. Great to have you at the microphone, Bruce. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's welcome him.
We are so fortunate to have leaders here that could reflect on these assets, and I want to first introduce Senator Torres, who will help lead this conversation. And I've known Senator Torres for a number of years, and her passionate voice and her policy leadership is phenomenal in the state, and she is the highest ranking Latina in state government, and being the chair of the State and Local Government Committee in the Senate. What impressed me the most this last session was she had a passion for a particular policy issue. And she did something that I've seen her do often. She put her foot on the dough and said, you can't close this dough. You got to listen to what I have to say. In spite, I think there's personal cost to that. But she said that you need to hear this, you need to hear the voice of the people and not what other people tell us that you need. This is what the people are saying we need. And so that kind of leadership is very powerful, very needed, and very much appreciated. And so I'm happy that she would come here. And also, some of the people that you see, I'll briefly introduce you to them before I invite them to come up here. We're so honored to have Consul General Alberto Fierro here. He's not just a Consul General that sits in an office. He's always in the community. He's always engaging with people. He's always listening. And now, in an increasing way, when we heard about the trade with Mexico, about how we can connect Minnesota to the global. Commissioner Kevin Lindsey is a leader about inclusion in the state of Minnesota. And again, he also stepped out very boldly and told people, you're going through very low levels of how many goal for employment. I think you should have 32% of people employed in projects. And people said, no, it can't be done. There's too much. but as he would tell you, there are many people that can get jobs if we go out to do it. And he's played a role in expanding this concept of human rights to include economic rights and economic opportunities, and has been and he's here representing the Dayton administration, because I've been in conversation with some of them, to receive this information and think about it from the state perspective. Thank you for coming here. And then we have Alberto Monseratte, who you know, he is a school board member in the Minneapolis School District, but also the publisher of La Prensa newspaper, but also a great community voice, always engaging and talking to people about how to push the agenda forward. Isabel Chanslor, I mentioned to you about her with the Neighborhood Development Center, and Emilia Gonzalez Avalos with Navigate Minnesota. And you've heard about Hector Garcia, and I've introduced to you Councilmember Alondra, Cano earlier. So I'll invite first Senator Patricia to take over this part of the program, and invite the other people to
mentioned
come
today. One is that, as you know, the governor of the state of Minnesota just came back from Mexico. He was invited by Consul Fierro to join a very large, important group of business people who decided to join that delegation, and that invitation actually was extended by the council. They work very hard. The governor gets a lot of invitations to travel all over the world, and we criticize him every time he makes the decision to go. So it's a big deal for the governor to go outside of Minnesota. So he has to pick very carefully, and then he has to make sure that these particular visits really bring connections that are practical and long-term for the state of Minnesota. So I think that the presentation that was made to the governor and the work that they work on to really make sure that he understood the valuable really results that could be brought to the state of Minnesota were very important. So I am going to really start with perhaps Commissioner Lindsey. I'm going to start with Consul Fierro, simply because I believe that his trip just ended last week. I think it was an incredibly important visit, a lot that needs to be said. Then I would like to invite Commissioner Lindsey. Commissioner Lindsey, you know, we hear Governor Dayton is doing this, Governor Dayton is doing the other. But at the end of the day, somebody's telling Governor Dayton what needs to happen, what needs to be done. And in areas of inclusion, in areas of human rights, in areas of opportunities, and really transforming the way we connect with people of color, Commissioner Lindsey is the person. And I tell you, Commissioner Lindsey is a person that really comes across as a kind of a quiet person, very thoughtful. He will not say a lot in your meetings, and then he goes back to his office, and then you will hear back, okay, done. That's how Commissioner Lindsey does his work. And I am very, I believe, Commissioner, that it will be very important that you announce all of the special initiatives that the administration is pursuing, and how is that the Mexican-American community and Latinos in general could really tap into that. Then I would like to definitely offer the microphone to Councilmember Alondra Cano, who's really dealing with a very, very important time in history for Mexican Americans. She represents a city where the most vibrant and largest Mexican community lives. The children that are attending the Minneapolis school system to whom we owe the budget that keeps those schools open live in her district. A lot of the people that, and I would like to, I forget something before I start. Somebody very important is here. Somebody that I've known and inspired me, that accompanies us to many of the things that we do. And one of the reasons I became an elected official, and that's Miranda. Miranda, ¿puedes venir aquí un minuto? Bueno, Miranda is one of the most important activists out there right now. If you go to a meeting about the Latino community, the Mexican community, I'm going to tell you, Miranda's going to be there. And she's going to take your name. So Miranda is the reason we're here. Miranda is the reason we're here. So let's not forget that. Gracias, Miranda, por estar aquí. When I was talking about Councilmember Cano, I just thought about Miranda, because I think you, Councilmember, really represent that energy and youth and the opportunity that exists. I think that the city, through you, is really speaking on behalf of these young people. Alberto Monseratte, New Publica, is going to talk to us about really what are the opportunities that we have to get our image out there, what is the message that we have. So I am going to make sure LEDC, of course, and Isabel with Neighborhood Development Association, NDC, doing a lot of work in St. Paul and other cities, multiple businesses. And I would like you to please talk about the opportunities that nonprofit organizations have and what we need to do in order to make sure that business people are more included in this conversation and what you've learned from lessons. And Emilia, of course, everybody knows Emilia, and Emilia is doing a tremendous amount of work on behalf of students, particularly students that really need to open opportunities in the state of Minnesota, undocumented students, students who are doing their job, who are doing their part, and they need an opportunity in our economy. So, Councilor Fierro, I'm sorry it took me long to present, but this is a large panel. So talk to us about your trip and tell us.
Yes. Thank you, Senator. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. And it was a pleasure to be part of the governor's mission to Mexico. It took 15 years for a governor to go back to Mexico, the southern partner and neighbor. And it was more than 40 people, a delegation of agricultural representatives, businessmen, and academic. There were several MOUs signed, mostly in higher education, because there is very clear knowledge that we have to work together in the creation of the workforce of North America, and Minnesota alone cannot do it, and Mexican universities are very willing to be working in partnership with universities of Minnesota. So there was an MOU finally signed between the National Council of Science and Technology and the University of Minnesota that will allow a lot more Mexicans coming to the U. There was another MOU between the MenSCU universities and the Mexican higher education institutions, precisely to bring Mexicans to take, but also for Minnesotans to go to Mexico. And the very interesting project between industry, as you know, there are many Minnesotan entities already in Mexico. So there will be a way in which private sector, government, and universities will be working in doing internships in both places. For example, the 3M workers in San Luis Potosí coming here, and from here going to San Luis, or the Medtronic workers from Tijuana here, and from here to Tijuana. So Minnesota will be one of the first states pioneering this new bilateral agreement. Another very important agreement was between women and agriculture. How can we share best practices in Mexico and Minnesota about women working in agriculture? So for me, the best part of the trip was when Governor Dayton, that I hadn't talked to him more than 5 phrases in 2 years, just said the last day, Mexico makes sense. I can follow through, and I want to come in 15 months because it really makes sense. And it makes sense because we're partners. And regarding the report of today, measuring and data is always complicated. Just 2 weeks ago, Mexico unveiled information of the new data of poverty measures in Mexico, and it depends on what you measure and how you measure. So for example, in Mexico, the pobreza alimentaria, people that don't have enough money to have food, the basic food, that type of poverty is down, but not the housing poverty. There's still a lot of people without. So it depends on how you measure. So I think that the information that Dr. Corrie gives us is very interesting, but it would be interesting to know how did the recession hit other ethnic groups, for example. Because I can tell for what I read is that still Mexicans are recovering from the recession. If this study had been done maybe 3 years ago, probably the numbers would have been even worse. So, but it would be interesting to know if Somalis, if Ecuadorians, if others were also as hit as they are. But I welcome this study because it allows all of us to think in what policies are needed and what can we do each in our sphere to help that migrant population have better access to housing, financial education, higher education like Navigate does, labor rights. We know they have a lot of the very risky jobs. What can we do to give more information and education on labor rights? How can we empower women and what kind of strategies should we be doing in order to empower them in every area? And healthcare, that we know the limits for those that are undocumented, but we also know that there are many other social organizations willing to be helping. So I welcome this report because this gives us a lot of information on how and what type of policies we should be pursuing. Thank you.
Thank you, Council. We appreciate it. Commissioner Lindsey, follow up to, we know you have been engaged in the process of designing the governor's strategies for inclusion, for opening opportunities within state government and outside. Could you tell us a little bit more and tie into what Council Fierro has been sharing with us?
I guess the first step I would like to do is I appreciate the opportunity. About 3 years ago, Consulate General's predecessor invited several members of the governor's cabinet when the Mexican ambassador came to town, and there was a real rich, vibrant discussion with leaders within state government and throughout all of Minnesota. And I think there it was really solidified, I think in a lot of people's minds, the importance, if it had not already been, as relates to strengthening the ties with Mexico. And I would say that was kind of the precursor for the later ask by your office for the governor to come to Mexico. And it was a very easy ask, I would say, to the governor because of your outstanding efforts and your predecessor's outstanding efforts. I think to underscore this report and its importance goes back to something that Hector had said at the beginning, is that all of the individuals in Minnesota matter, and reports where we break down and we identify and share information is important to share the importance and the connection of all. Some of you may be aware of sort of at the national level, we have this discourse going on, and I would be remiss not to say from a historical basis that there were things in the 1850s and the 1860s about this know-nothing party talking about immigrants and how they were going to tear apart the fabric of the United States. And at that point in time, those immigrants spoke some of the languages of German, Scandinavian, and somehow the country prospered, got stronger, and moved forward. So history sometimes is a funny way of repeating itself for those who are not paying attention to the historical lessons. And I think this is an opportunity for us to reach back into our own history, understand it, and instead of cowering back to fear, building a stronger region, stronger state, stronger country. And Minnesota can be a North Star to that respective point. So you asked me a question as relates to sort of what the governor's office is doing. The governor's office recently signed a Diversity and Inclusion Council order, and that sets forth a vision for the state to be an intentional model employer of choice for all people within the state of Minnesota. It also sets forth for the state to be a model business partner with all communities within the state. And then the third thing which it's seeking to do is something new, which has not really been done within prior executive orders of governors, and that is to be a model player in the engagement of public policy with all communities within the state. Wouldn't it be fantastic if we could take the rich vibrancy, the knowledge of what exists in all the respective communities within our state, and that number that pops up to me is at 2.2 billion as it relates for export. What if we were to transport all of the respective languages which are spoken here in Minnesota, the knowledge base as it relates to around the world, and become even more of an economic driver on the world stage? That's an opportunity. And this report shows that there are many opportunities like that if we're willing to sort of take advantage of it. So for me, this is an important next step, I would say, as a Governor's Diversity and Inclusion Council. I'm enthusiastic about working with this respective community and all communities within the state of Minnesota to drive us forward. So thank you for being a part of it. And I thank Dr. Corrie not only for your work here, but for your work in all areas as it relates to really highlighting the contributions of all Minnesotans.
Thank you, Commissioner. Just briefly, could you let the public know about there are two aspects, I think, that were presented, at least to me, a year ago about the contract opportunities and how you want to reshape contracts to make sure that more minorities are involved in the process, and then the goals to hire more minorities and hire more people that reflect the communities that we serve.
So I appreciate the question, and I want to be sensitive to everyone on the panel. So I'll be quick as it relates to workforce participation goals. So for our department, when I got to in this position, the workforce construction goals for projects like the Viking Stadium, they were set for 11% of participation by broadly people of color. That's the number of hours. So if the project was to take 10,000 hours, 1,100 of the hours would be the goal as relates to participation for people of color. So I adjusted the goals to 32%, realizing, going back to the demographics which were spoken earlier about, is that if you look at the workforce of 45 and older in the state of Minnesota, that typically is white, not of Hispanic origin. But if you look at the workforce between 18 and 35, that's more reflective of the rich cultural diversity within. So yes, even though there are a lot more individuals who would identify white, not of Hispanic origin in the state, they are not of the age typically of what you find for most construction workers. So how do we understand where we are within the demographic? How do we understand as it relates to participation within various jobs? And the good news within the participation rate for construction is that if you look at projects today in the state of Minnesota as a whole that we monitor, it's at 28%. Now, a lot of that is driven by how large the Viking Stadium project is, but even if you were to take out the Viking Stadium project, the projects within Hennepin County would be in the low 20%. So that's significant, because those minority hours worked on the Viking Stadium, if you took them out and then applied them to the other Hennepin County projects, we would be about 40% minority participation on all of those Hennepin County projects. So to me, that kind of illustrates, unfortunately, sometimes we're not really seeing the change which is already occurring within our region and within our state. The workers were there, the numbers of hours were there 3-4 years ago, and now they're going forward. As it relates to the business community, Commissioner Massman is really looking at and trying to really scope out, map out all the businesses which exist. And we're really looking forward to kind of partnering with Dr. Corrie and others to map that out. And what I would say again, if you take a look at the businesses that have partnered with the Sports Facility Authority, I would say you would also see a substantial increase in the business partnerships which have been created by that project. How do we take what's going on there and then take it down to Destination Medical Center Rochester? And what I would submit is going to be the expansive growth within the healthcare field within the Twin Cities region over the next 10 to 15 years. And that's not to include agriculture or other areas. The Twin Cities is really primed in a position to enjoy extensive growth if we're all willing to work together.
Thank you, Commissioner. I know the time, but this is something incredibly important, I think, that everybody should know. Councilwoman Cano, tell us a little bit about, when we go to your geographic area, to your ward, we feel the community, and we know that the community is responsible for the significant growth that Dr. Corrie talked about. I remember when we were begging people, to put money to buy the building where Mercado Central is, and now you're coming back, really so many years after to say, okay, what are we going to do to expand this, to continue to support, and you have been in these battles. Tell us more about how this connects to really this important community in our state.
Absolutely, thank you. So my name is Alondra Cano, and I'm the first Mexican American and Latina elected to the Minneapolis City Council. I represent a district of about 30,000 people, and out of those 30,000 people, 35% of them are of Latino heritage. The first group being Mexican, second group being Ecuadorian, and then we have a broad mix of folks from Central America and Latin America. So, as I was looking at some of the statistics and the issues here, it really hits home because when my family immigrated to Minnesota, we immigrated to a small town in Meeker County called Litchfield, and both of my parents worked at the meatpacking companies, Sparbo and Genio, and undoubtedly, firsthand, I have seen how the Mexican community has kept schools open, has kept small towns thriving, has kept rural Minnesota moving forward, and I think that's really important for us to recognize and to invest back into that community that has kept Minnesota at the cutting edge of a national trend. And so when we're looking at those issues of how do we identify these patterns of both growth, all these contributions, all the additions to the economy, whether we're consumers or producers, but then this report is also really important in pointing out the disparities. And I think that's what's really useful for me here is really taking a step back and looking at the gap. And so we can feel the community, we can feel the community's vibrancy and the sacrifice and hard work that they have put into turning communities around like East Lake Street. So if you know where Lake and Bloomington is, if you know where the Midtown Global Market is, that's the community that I represent, and it's the most diverse in the entire city. Not only do we have Latinos, but we also have a strong East African and American Indian presence there. So for me, this report is really a call to action. And it's a call to action for policymakers to double down on investments on equity, racial equity, ensuring that if indeed migrant workers or 70% of the Mexican workforce in Minnesota is U.S. citizens, if those folks are contributing to this economy in such a strong way, why is it that the Department of Chicano and Latino Studies at the University of Minnesota, which is a land-grant institution funded by our public dollars, still only has 2 full-time faculty professors? And they're struggling to make ends meet. They're struggling to staff their offices and their departments. And so the senator and I started talking about an initiative to try to specifically fund that department because the university itself is not making that direct investment. And so we need to really pair up all of these contributions with significant and tangible and practical investments that really uplift this community. So I would say that that's an initiative that we're working on now, and many people in my district are employed by that department. A lot of Latino people are employed by that department that live in Ward 9, and it's really hard to hear from your residents, hey, I might lose my job because the University of Minnesota is not investing in helping the people of Minnesota understand the history and the importance of the Mexican American community, the Chicano community, the Latino community in Minnesota through this department. We see that one of the issues the report highlights is depletion in wealth and stagnating wages for Latinos and Mexicans specifically. And so one of the initiatives we have looked at is how do we pass a citywide minimum wage ordinance that pays $15 an hour. Does anybody know right now what the living wage number is for a family of 4 here in the Twin Cities? 18, I heard. Anybody else have a guess? 55, it's actually a little bit lower, it's 33. So if for a family of 4, let's say a working adult and 3 children, to make a living wage and have enough money to make ends meet, it would be $33 an hour. So when the state is at $9 or $9.50, and when we as a city are asking people to entertain a $15 minimum wage ordinance, it's not really that much. And I would love to see how many of you would like to work for $9.50 an hour. I wouldn't, and I'm trying to work really hard to organize with my council colleagues to change that. And so when we're looking at the contributions that the Mexican community's bringing forward, we really have to think about paying that back, right, or paying it forward. And how do we all do better when we all do better, as the late Senator Wellstone used to say. We are also looking at a homeownership investment opportunity at the city, where we're working in a new way to try to help Latinos become homeowners. So we saw the rates have decreased of Latino homeownership. We know that they were hit really hard with the foreclosure crisis. The loans that they were given were not fair or just loans. We know that the evictions were high, and I remember hearing stories of friends who were looking to buy homes in Powderhorn, and they would go into these homes that were had recently just been vacated by families, to the point where their laundry was still in the washer and the dryer, because they were, sheriff's eviction. And so when we look at those issues of inequities, and when we look at the contributions, not only monetarily but also cultural and artistic and linguistic, where we have young people who are in this community now growing up bilingual and bicultural, that not only can they understand the Latino experience, but they can also understand the mainstream American experience. Those are the types of solutions and global leaders we need at our tables today. Minnesota in general, and the Twin Cities specifically, will double in people of color by the year 2040. And these are the numbers that are coming out of the Met Council. And so when we're looking at the baby boomer population declining and people of color doubling, we really need to figure out, how do we turn all of these economic contributions into civic engagement and civic participation of Mexican people and of Latino people? How do we increase voting? How do we increase stability in our neighborhoods? And that's part of the work we're doing with the Cultural Corridors Framework, which is a business development framework that we learned about through the American Indian community on Franklin Avenue, where a lot of these efforts around planning and zoning and land use were taken back to the community in a culturally relevant way to say, what do you want to see in your neighborhood? What do you think should be the plan adopted here to ensure that you stay and that you don't get kicked out through gentrification or displacement? And so when there are national and local leaders advancing agendas around affordable housing that don't come from communities of color, or aren't Mexican themselves speaking for us, that's problematic. And so I think there's a group of people that are organizing to make sure that those folks who are people of color, who are impacted by this, are leading those conversations and are shaping those policy solutions. And so our role as allies and our role as policymakers, I believe, is to work with those communities to craft those solutions together and then implement them. So with that, I'll just say that I think for us the challenge is really turning all these amazing benefits that we see into robust civic engagement models that will really help policy, city making, nation building, and sustainability for the future.
Thank you, Councilwoman. This is a lot of information and a lot of opportunities that we really need to track, especially in your ward. Thank you so much for sharing that. Alberto, now you really have worked on trying to capture all of this incredible energy, this image of the community, and really pass it on to the world. So tell us what is happening now. What do you see in terms, you work with politicians, you work with private sectors, you work with schools, you work with so many sectors that really are paying attention to our community, that understand the importance of the significant growth. What do you see is happening with the Latino community? What is the perception? Why is that you think that our presence, so, Dr. Corrie used a term of invisibility. A lot of people are using that term now, that there's so many of us, yet there is some sense of invisibility, that people are ignoring the community. Mariano with this incredible presence at the Capitol. I don't think there was any other community. Well, maybe neighborhoods organizing for change. We were competing with them. This was a good year for African American community, and really working on issues with the neighborhood. But I think the African American community and the Latino community had significant presence in the Capitol, and yet we're not able to really move forward some policies that are so important to the community to really understand how we shape and change these numbers. Tell us, what do you hear? What do you see?
Sure. Well, being in the public relations communications world, one of the things I think we're facing an issue that's even worse than invisibility right now. Unfortunately, hate grabs headlines and facts don't. I can guarantee you if today we had a certain leader making false claims about Mexicans, we would have TV cameras all over the place. But unfortunately, facts are not often as sexy as straight out lying about a community without any facts to back them. So I think when you have a Lou Dobbs, for example, that had a CNN audience, and he was able to say false things about immigrants and Mexicans, or when you have tens of thousands of undocumented youth escaping certain violent death and turning themselves in at the border to avoid that certain death, that grabs headlines and people demagogue the issue, and they falsely portray what's really happening there. And what we've seen recently is when a well-known celebrity becomes a political leader and defames Mexicans and immigrants, that's what grabs headlines. So what we need to do as a community is we need to relentlessly present the facts. Thank God for people like Bruce Corrie, who will go out there and look for the facts. As he said before, facts that have not been disputed before. And then we also have to really highlight those really great assets that we're bringing. We are absolutely only going to do this together. And it's only going to happen when most Minnesotans realize that this is to their benefit. This is what will keep Minnesota competitive, the economic growth. I've said several times recently publicly, the most exciting economic activities in the world right now are happening in Asia, are happening in Africa, and are happening in Latin America. That's where growth is happening. We have thousands and thousands and thousands of students in our public schools in Minnesota who speak Somali at home, who speak Spanish at home, and who speak many Asian language at home. That is one of our biggest assets. That's our secret weapon for Minnesota future growth. And anybody who doesn't think that when leaders say the false statements they make about Mexicans, if that doesn't do damage to our children, if doesn't do damage to our psyche. So we have to highlight those positive things that are happening. It was great to hear that the Minnesota governor said that this was the most productive trade trip that he had had. I want that repeated more and more. And that was a very smart thing to do because between 2007 and 2012, trade exports to Mexico increased by 237% to $2.2 billion, which I believe is now the second largest country that's a trading partner for the state of Minnesota. When tens of thousands of college-educated baby boomers will be retiring in the next few years, who is going to replace those college-educated workers? It's going to be immigrants. It's going to be Mexicans or people with Mexican ancestry. So this is why this is what we need to somehow relentlessly put out there and put resources into getting that information out there. The Center for the Americas has come up with also an incredible amount of positive information about the contributions of immigrants. So we need to continue to push that information. And until your colleagues in the legislature, who I know, are your esteemed colleagues, but you also have gotten a lot of heat from, until they understand and their constituents understand the incredible benefits that Mexicans bring to the state, we're not going to see much change.
Isabel. Isabel, tell us a little bit about, your organization really deals with people who really want to put business in place. And what we understand, a couple of issues we understand. One is that seldom times Mexican Americans are asking for help. They go do it on their own. They save their money, they make the sacrifice, they're not asking organizations, they just go and do it by themselves. So it's a lot harder to do it on your own. And the other part is that this risk, people admire how Latinos take risk. They're not afraid to take risk. Yet, we're not recognized. People don't recognize those abilities. And so they have to work harder, they have to take greater risks, and we kind of have this expectation that they're going to thrive. What do you see? What is your organization seeing now? Why do we have a decline in investment in business? Why are we having trouble? I understand that business are struggling to pay taxes, business are struggling to stay in their buildings, they cannot afford, they came into these places when nobody wanted to come, when nobody wanted to open business, there was a tortilleria, there was a panaderia. We took risk. Now that these corridors are thriving, now we cannot afford to stay. Could you tell us what is the organization seeing now, and where do you think we need to step in to really be a greater voice for those business owners?
Well, thank you very much, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here and talk about the report. For a neighborhood development center, we concentrate on building entrepreneurs and having entrepreneurs build their businesses, and we do that within particular communities in St. Paul and Minneapolis, and some suburbs where there is a large number of immigrant communities. We work with people of color and all people who want to build a business, primarily not focusing on immigrant populations, but that is a large number of people that we serve. And because immigrants, out of necessity, or out of the passion that they have and the talent that they have, they find a way to create their own economy. They find a way to support their families. They find ways to earn wages or to earn an income beyond what they can earn out in a job, where people are not going to give them the opportunity to earn a living wage. Some of them come here with education that's far beyond mine and many other people that I know, doctors and lawyers and people who were scientists in their own countries, and come here and cannot fill those roles. They cannot play that role. So business is something that they turn to. And you're right, many business owners do it on their own, especially Latinos. They collect their money, they work 2 to 3 jobs, they borrow from family, not always, but sometimes. They will put that money in and start the business on cold hard cash. And that is a very difficult thing to do. And it's something that we don't recommend at neighborhood development centers, and many CDCs would not, community development corporations wouldn't recommend that. But it's because there really isn't a lot of faith in the system. So there's a lot of challenges out there. And even when you do a business and you go to an organization like us, it may seem like there's a lot of barriers to get there. There's a lot of forms to fill out. There's a lot of information that we need, and we're looking at credit, and we're looking at your taxes, and we're looking at a lot of situations that make people very nervous. So we have to learn more and more how to make that process, we have to be compassionate in that process, but also make that process a little easier for people to ease into. And so we've done much work with creating and supporting collaboratives and cooperatives, especially like the Mercado Central, Plaza Latina across the street from there. We have 7 properties, Midtown Global Market being another, where we help to kind of create spaces for low income, very small mom and pop operations to begin and to grow. La Loma being one, and they employ, oh my gosh, hundreds of people now. So it's a wonderful story there at La Loma. And that's not the only story. We have many stories like that. When I thought about this report and the work that we need to be doing in the future at neighborhood development centers and other community development corporations, I'm thinking about anchor institutions. So anchor institutions here in the Central Corridor have gathered for about 3 years now. They have met They have shared information. They have a report coming out hopefully by next week. And what that report is going to share with the public is how much money they spend in procurement and how much of that money is being spent in the Central Corridor. And the Central Corridor is pretty wide in their definition. It goes from the east side all the way to your area, Councilman Cano. And it's a lot of money. We're talking about billions and then multiple of millions being spent in the Central Corridor. But we would like to identify who are the vendors that are receiving those opportunities, how are they receiving those opportunities, and how can we get more of the entrepreneurs of color, Latino entrepreneurs, African American entrepreneurs, East African, to participate in that opportunity. And I think that with this report, hopefully it will get these anchor institutions, many of them which are public entities, colleges, and then some of them private, like health companies, to encourage them to say, okay, we do have the ability to move some of this money, shift some of the opportunity into the state of Minnesota, but also into communities and in the hands of these amazing entrepreneurs that could probably service you at a better price in a better way. So that's an opportunity that we're looking at, but it's quite complicated because those systems don't have the structures in place to monitor how many of these procurement opportunities are going to people of color. There's really not a system that they're kind of calculating and measuring annually, quarterly, to see, okay, we need to do better. They just do procurement and really don't look at a lot of, requirements or rules or pieces of policy that would help them kind of make it an equitable process. And so we would really love to have the support of your department to kind of think about what processes could be put in place, because it seems to get complicated, and I just don't think it's that complicated. Job creation is another thing that is something that community development corporations are being asked to pay attention to. So there's the opportunities of cultivating entrepreneurs, and that's training and lending to businesses that are actually adding many more jobs and jobs that are livable wage jobs. So that's a new venture for us in the last couple of years that we're looking to expand even more. So these are opportunities that CDCs play in the community, but policy work would definitely help us get the work done even better. And something that you said was that, the money is getting slim for economic development work at this level. When we're talking about small business, it's shrinking. Housing, it's increased, but for businesses, it's shrinking. And that is a concern for us in our industry of community development. And we would like to see a change in that, for sure. And then the thing that I want to close with, I'm very grateful to Dr. Corrie. Something that he said today is going to change the way that I talk about my family. Because I always say, and I told you this week, my family were migrant workers. I grew up on a migrant farm. And something that Dr. Corrie said today was that, many times we were not migrant. We had, we stayed on these properties for years. We didn't migrate anywhere. And that's true. So my parents were Americans, born in the United States. I was born in the United States. However, they were not treated as Americans. We lived on a migrant farm, and I grew up on a migrant farm. And the school that we went to was about 15 miles away. But I think I'm going to change and find a way to change that narrative and not talk about my family as a migrant family. I'm going to have to find the word for it, but I think that I do appreciate that. That was profound. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Isabel. Emilia, energy and passion. When I look at you, I just think about all of the youth and how relevant this conversation. You saw the numbers that Dr. Corrie talks about, significant growth. Our young people are looking for these opportunities. And higher ed is really the work that you're doing with young people to pursue opportunities. The first thing that was announced, with the trip to Mexico was really the partnership with higher ed. What do we need to do to open opportunities for people to go to Mexico? Actually, there are some people who are going to Mexico to pursue higher education because it's so good and much cheaper. So it's interesting that a lot of our youth are thinking about going over there. So maybe we can do an exchange. So many things that could happen between Mexico and Minnesota. And we want to hear from you as to what the students are saying. What are you seeing? What are the opportunities that are present to us?
Thank you, Senator. My name is Emilia Gonzalez Avalos. I'm the Executive Director of Navigate Minnesota. And I am undocumented. I happen to be one of those numbers of the undocumented Mexicanos. I am one of them, and so is my whole family. My daughter right there is our firstborn in the U.S. And yes, the work that we do is very personal to me and very personal to our families. And when I came into leadership with Navigate Minnesota, I was very impressed by the stories of exceptionalism that we encounter with Dreamers that have amazing GPAs and amazing talent, and that they found private institutions that are willing to invest in their development and their education. And eventually, in 2012, when DACA was approved, that has paid off in our communities, in many aspects of our communities in general. One of the things that I am doing with with my leadership in the organization is to go back and, like Councilmember Cano was saying, and look at those gaps. Who is not being part of this process? Who is being left behind, and why? And like I said, this is very personal to me because when I graduated from high school, I took my test, my IQ-PACER test for science and language, and I scored. I know calculus, and I scored very highly, but they didn't believe that I could know calculus because I didn't have an English level up to the standards of the person that was giving me the test. So I didn't have the opportunity that I thought that I could earn through my hard work and the investment of my parents in my education. And but I have a very smart dad, very hard worker, one of those migrant workers, and eventually ended up in Minnesota working in meat packing and potato packing as well, potato processing. And he said that we should not give up and we should keep working and we should keep asking for opportunities. So I also did not graduate. I don't have a bachelor's degree, but I was very grateful to a lot of the people in the Chicano Studies Department that let me sit on their classes so I could learn about policy, I could learn my heritage, and I could learn a lot of the things that have given me the tools to take this leadership role. So when I hear that we need more people with degrees, yes, we do need more people with degrees. But one of the lessons learned in this process is that the access to opportunity and what is basically health equity is informed deeply by the socioeconomic environment. And given the structural barriers, in my organization, we're required to be innovative, deeply innovative, in that translates to looking at models that perceive our communities from an asset perspective. And it's also through the Chicano Studies Department that we develop a relationship with Dr. Yoso from California. And she has been teaching us about the model of community cultural wealth that looks at families, family capital, social capital, navigational capital, resistant capital, aspirational, linguistic, and cultural capital. So through this model, we're able to go to all the school districts that we're invited to and speak to families about the things that they do have, the things that they do right now that elevate and nurture the little ones in home or the ones that are in middle school or high school or even in higher education, and how that informs the social upward mobility and their success in higher ed. We know that we need investment. We know that we have gaps that transcend besides the economic gaps and the opportunity gaps of health, employment, and housing, and even living in safe communities, environmentally friendly communities. And we are bringing those opportunities and those stories to the table. I think that this is an opportunity to change the discourse with institutions of higher education, and instead of them telling us that we should be here because we can get a degree and that can look better in our resumes or our CVs, the invitation should be translated to, we know what you have to bring to the table. We know you have cultural capital. We know that you have a really good backbone in your families, and you have something to give us. Here is the table. Let's talk about that. Speaking to students and families from a place of asset changes the whole conversation, and it helps us support our base that came here to have a better opportunity. So, in short, thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you so much to all the folks that were here today. I know that you've been a good crowd listening to our thoughts and our ideas, and thank you to all the panelists who joined us this afternoon as well. I think for me, it comes down to how we use this information to continue to educate, organize, and mobilize in our communities. Whether you're the president of a university, whether you're a policymaker, whether you're youth development program officer and a foundation, or you're a community activist looking to make change. I think for us, the homework should really be, how do we share this information that we found today? We know that social media is really powerful. You can tweet about it, you can Facebook about it, you can share this information and use it as a call to action. How are we going to close the gaps? How are we going to close the disparities that this report is so poignantly raising? The issue of contributions, the issue of us being really active members of the social fabric and local economy, but yet our homeownership rates are declining. We have 30% of the folks in this report in the community without access to health care. So first, education, continuing to raise the voice around these issues, sharing this with the people that you know, bringing it up at dinner conversations at your next board meeting, trying to identify how you incorporate this and integrate this into your daily work. Then how do you organize around a plan? What is it that you can join? What is a campaign that you feel can really help bring some of these issues to the forefront, whether it's the driver's license campaign or the $15 minimum wage campaign, or perhaps you're one of the housing advocates that sits at those Met Council tables or at the PPL tables, where you can start talking about how do we encourage more, incentivize and really support more people of color to become homeowners. And then lastly, how do we really mobilize the community? You were talking earlier about, the community member here was talking about getting 300 people in a room. Turnout is huge, and it's one of the most important ways to have elected people like myself be held accountable to a higher standard. And even though I see myself as being a champion of a lot of the issues our communities are facing, I still need that political support and that political backing, because without that, my voice becomes weaker at the tables that I sit at. So the more pressure people are putting on the ground around these issues, the more community conversations that are being convened. Maybe you have another report release in Minneapolis and in Austin and Worthington, and you do your tour, and all of those things really help each other. So educate, organize, and mobilize, and let's move forward some of these policy solutions together. Stay connected. Hopefully folks were able to sign in, and maybe we can circulate that sign-in sheet so everyone can stay connected. Thank you.